It began with a battle, was blessed by a Baptist minister, and these days takes a blaze of flames to finish, and decades to perfect.
Well, bourbon is magic.
The first one really makes me want to have the second one real bad. I just love the way it tastes.
Now maybe you think you know all you need to know about bourbon.
You get to a certain age, at least men, you don't shop anymore. So I wanted to know what bourbon I wanted when I went to the liquor store.
But the more you know about what goes into it, the more you're gonna get out of it. It's about the subtle differences that make one bottle a perfect mixer and another worth a king's ransom.
As a millionaire, that's probably what you'd be drinking.
Is the secret in the water? Could it be in the barrel? We're gonna tell you where to find the white dog and what the angel's share should be, plus when it's okay to add ice. From the bottom of the barrel to the facts behind the bottle, we're gonna show you how to choose the best bourbon and how the best is done. So much bourbon, so little time. Let's get started. But wait a second, what is bourbon?
All bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon.
All whiskeys share the same 4 regulations. Whiskey is a spirit, it's distilled, crafted from grain. It is distilled below 190 proof. It is aged in an oak container, and it can be bottled at no less than 80 proof. Now, bourbon whiskey takes those 4 rules and really adds some teeth to them.
So here's what makes bourbon different from the other whiskeys. Number 1, bourbon is made with corn.
So you have the 51% corn minimum, and the second grain you have an option of using either wheat or rye. Also has to be aged at least 2 years in new charred oak barrels. Not a used barrel, but a new barrel.
We're the only whiskey in the world that doesn't allow for the addition of caramel coloring.
Bourbon has to be made in the United States. And it does not have to be made just in Kentucky. It can be made anywhere, but most of it is made in Kentucky today.
So that's the legal definition of America's native spirit. That's right, Congress declared it our official spirit in 1964. But it took a little bit of luck and a whole lot of magic to get to that point. And we promised you some fighting. So let's go back to bourbon's beginning. Farther. Farther. No, keep going. Okay, here we are. Way back when, whiskey was an important part of life on the farm, good for whatever ails you. Not just a drink, but a frontier companion, or maybe the antiseptic you used to swab out a scratch or a bullet hole. In 1794, a very young United States government levied a tax on distilled spirits. Frontier farmers used to converting their surplus grain into alcohol complained, and the people rose up. It began as a peaceful civil protest, but soon became an active resistance, including the tarring and feathering of at least one unfortunate tax collector. And eventually, it became an armed rebellion. The Whiskey Rebellion is generally considered to have been the first test of the fledgling country's new authority. Called upon to defend his shiny new constitution, President George Washington sent in the militia. The handful of men arrested were later pardoned by Washington, who went on to become one of the biggest whiskey distillers in the country. By 1799, Washington's distillery was turning out some 11,000 gallons of whiskey per year. What the Whiskey Rebellion also did was drive some of the smaller distillers farther afield, out of the reach of the feds. The state of Kentucky offered settlers 400 acres of free land if they would build a cabin and grow some corn. And it worked.
We knew what to do with all the grain we had to grow to get the free land. And that was converted into something that was valuable and non-perishable, and that was whiskey.
In 1811, there were 2,000 farmers in Kentucky that were registered to have these 50-gallon or larger stills.
And here's where the magic began. It turned out that there was, well, something in the water.
Well, let me tell you what the magic is. It's where the limestone from the east meets the soil from the west that has no ferrous oxide in it.
It makes for for good bourbon.
which is the reason the distilleries are so close together.
You can get the corn from anywhere. You can get the wheat from anywhere. It's our limestone water that really makes the bourbon. It's high in calcium, low in iron. So that's why we have great racehorses and great bourbon.
But the whiskey hadn't become bourbon quite yet. It needed a little help. Let's just call it divine intervention.
Elijah Craig was a Baptist minister.
He was making whiskey, and at this point he ended up putting it in barrels that were charred.
Originally, these barrels were fish barrels, so they burned them to get the fish smell and all that out.
You filled it up with straw, and you set fire to it. And this killed any bacteria, sanitized the barrel so you could use it for something else. So a charred barrel was not unusual, but putting the whiskey in a charred barrel is what made the difference in the taste.
The big market was New Orleans, which took about 3 months to get to on a flatbed barge.
And so they put the bourbon in thinking that when they got to New Orleans it was going to be a clear product just like it was when they put in.
And while it was in that barrel, it took on this great flavor.
During the time spent in the charred oak barrels, the whiskey turned red and flavorful.
They sent a message back and said, "What is this red liquid you sent us?" And then the next thing you know, people started to like it because of the flavor.
And they referred to it as, "Have you any of that whiskey from Bourbon?" Meaning Bourbon County.
So there you have it. Elijah Craig puts whiskey in a dirty old barrel from Bourbon County, Kentucky, and America's native spirit is born. Now keep in mind that back in the day, bourbon was not the same stuff we see today. It was called firewater for a reason.
It's nothing as smooth or as good as what we're doing today.
If Maker's Mark had been invented by my great-grandfather instead of my father, all his buddies who would have been distillers would have called it sissy whiskey. Because they weren't looking for smooth and refined, they were looking for something that helped them get through the day fighting Indians, and it was a pretty rough existence. And bourbon fit well into that environment, old bourbon.
But bourbon's roughest battle was yet to come. In 1920, the U.S. government banned the production and sale of all alcohol. Kentucky was devastated. Shutting down the liquor industry put thousands of distillery workers and barrel makers out of work.
It's the only time in our history we lost population. People had to move out to find work because many people worked in the industry.
In some cases, they wound up resorting to activities that were perhaps a trifle shady.
It made a lot of our legal, law-abiding citizens break the law. We have a local order of nuns, and the good sisters were so proud of the fact that they had a really good supporter who took them to Louisville in a car whenever they needed to go. Later they found out every time that he took a load of nuns, he unloaded his illegal whiskey and sold it to his contacts in Louisville.
But it wasn't all moonshine. Congress did leave one loophole.
They did declare that whiskey had a medicinal value, so they allowed 4 distilleries to remain open to distill medicinal whiskey. We were one of those 4 and the only one in Kentucky allowed to remain open during that period of time. If you went to a doctor during that period of time and he or she prescribed medicinal whiskey to help cure your illness, they would literally write you a prescription for up to 1 pint of 100 proof whiskey every 10 days. Fortunately for us, we had lots of people with lingering illnesses, so our doors have never been shut. We've always been open.
Prohibition was repealed in 1934, and bourbon came down from the hills. But the times, they were a-changin', and bourbon had to change with those times. Coming up, we'll show you how that happened, meet the tastemakers you need to know, and jump on the bourbon trail.
If you really want to know how the best bourbon's made, you have to come to Kentucky.
This is where you'll get the message straight from the horse's mouth.
When How the Best is Done returns. The law of physics says that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Maybe that's why the state that birthed bourbon was also home to its greatest opponent, the fiery leader of the anti-alcohol activists, Carrie Nation.
Carrie Nation was the best known leader in the temperance movement. She would pick up her hatchet and she would go in saloons and start breaking up stuff. She had the strength of her convictions, and Carrie had 2 husbands, both of whom were alcoholics. But nobody says whether they were drinkers before she married them or just after she married them.
Welcome back to how the best is done. Kentucky is known for beautiful things: rolling hills, farms, stone fences, horses, and of course, bourbon. What would Kentucky be without bourbon?
Well, let's put it this way, it might be like Indiana.
Perish the thought. But thankfully, Kentucky is where 95% of all bourbon is made. That's why we've come here, to learn from the world's finest practitioners of the craft. And speaking of making it, it's time to go to the bottom of the barrel. The barrel is more than just a container. It's an essential part of the process. That's because alcohol goes into the container as whiskey, and it comes out bourbon. And the reason is the barrel.
We tend to think it's probably 70 to 85% of our bourbon's flavor is coming from the barrel since it's in there so long.
Come on, the next stop is Bluegrass Cooperage. About half of the world's bourbon barrels come out of its doors. Not surprisingly, it's located in Louisville, Kentucky. The cooperage is owned by the Brown-Forman Company, makers of Woodford Reserve and other spirits. The barrels made here are crafted for each of their specific brands. A surprising amount of work is done by hand. Barrels are made from American white oak, cut into staves, and assembled by the barrel raisers.
The barrel raisers are very skilled workers. They are taking these nice jointed and cut staves, and usually 33 staves at a time, they will form the body of the barrel. And they will alter a wide stave with a narrow stave, a wide stave with a narrow stave, so they can have a nice bend to the barrel. They have to work fast. When the cooperage is making 2,000 barrels a day and you have 5 barrel raisers, they're doing a lot of work.
So 2,000 barrels divided by 5 workers equals 400 barrels per person per day. The folks here at Bluegrass are exacting in their standards for every part of the barrel. The staves are steamed into the proper shape. Spools of soft iron are cut to form the hoops, which are riveted around the barrel. The coopers work with traditional methods to ensure quality. They've got their tricks too, like the beeswax used here to make the barrel head fit smoothly. But the real secret to the finished product is all in the char, the fire in the barrel. Burning the wood releases the flavors within.
When the barrel's been charred and it's just fresh off the heat, it reminds me of a toasted marshmallow. The oak itself breaks down into its natural sugar components, and those sugar components in turn caramelize. So there's a very fine layer we call the red layer of caramelized wood sugar under the char, and that's going to give us our big sweet aromatic notes, the butterscotch and maple syrup and chocolate and caramel notes.
There are 4 degrees of char, from light to dark.
Number 4 will be a heavy char. It's usually called an alligator char because it looks like an alligator handbag or an alligator shoe.
So, light char, light bourbon. Dark char, heavy taste.
If you want a very light-bodied bourbon, light color, not a lot of tannic notes, you would want a light char. If you want a real strong candy or caramel notes, you go for a number 4 char, and obviously anywhere in between, you will dial up the appropriate char level.
So what's the formula for a Woodford Reserve barrel?
Each of our toast and char designations is a proprietary secret.
That's how important the barrel char is. Even we couldn't get the secret formula. Since straight bourbon must age a minimum of 2 years, the container makes a huge difference even on the youngest of them. But it's not the only factor. These guys aren't throwing just anything in those barrels and hoping for the best. Since the days of Elijah Craig, recipes have been refined and retuned. Each of the tweaks and subtleties leads to what's known as a profile.
A bourbon profile is the complete product. It's the appearance, it's the aroma, the taste, and the aftertaste. The profile of Woodford Reserve is quite complex. It's a very dark brownish orange bourbon whiskey, beautiful. It has a wonderful aroma that just doesn't rush out of the glass. It's like a fine red wine. It breathes, it begins to open up.
In the bourbon world, there's seemingly an infinite variety of profiles. There's no better showcase than a restaurant named, appropriately enough, Bourbon's Bistro.
We have every bourbon that we can get our hands on it through our distributor. So we have about 135 bourbons right now. As far as I know, we have the most on any list in any restaurant or bar.
In the country.
In the country.
That we're aware of.
A lot of people come in and think bourbon's bourbon, and that's it. When we have 135 and each one is unique.
135, huh? Name them.
Oh, wow. That would be very, very difficult. Very, very
I can
difficult.
name overhand.
Yeah, I think so. The two main profiles is you're going to have a wheated bourbon that's going to be sweeter, and you're going to have a rye bourbon that's going to be hotter. So.
Almost compared to wheat bread and rye bread, where wheat bread is a little sweeter, easier on the palate, where rye bread has a little more bite to it.
John and Jason's bread comparison is an apt one, and it's one that Bill Samuels can personally attest to.
We came here in the early 1780s. We've owned and operated distilleries since that time, and I'm the 7th generation of my father's family to give it a try.
In the 1950s, in an attempt to reinvent his traditional bourbon, Bill Samuels' father went through lots of recipes.
Bourbon traditionally had a harshness to it that really made it unpopular except in the West. The West at that time was Kentucky. And he wanted to add refinement, he wanted to add smoothness without stripping the character. He wanted to create a bourbon that took the bitterness out. We resorted to the kitchen, not to make bourbon, but to make bread.
Why bread? Because of the grains, of course.
A lot of the same taste characteristics of the bread would in fact exist in the bourbon.
So Bill's mother baked using corn and rye and wheat, the traditional components of bourbon.
And she made, I don't know, 300 or 400 loaves of bread. That was her job. His job was to taste the bread and magically decide how that translated to what the whiskey formula needed to be. And in the end, it really resulted in taking out the rye and replacing it with red winter wheat. And it just made all difference in the world.
The new smoother, sweeter bourbon was called Maker's Mark.
Back in the late 50s when it was introduced, it was the bourbon for folks that didn't like bourbon.
Bill Sr. was so sure he had the right formula, he set the old one on fire.
He did it right here in this room, right where we're sitting, and he took his great-great-great-grandfather's bourbon recipe that we'd been using since the 1780s and wadded it up and put it in this little bucket, which has a small opening and a large belly, and put some more papers in and some lighter fluid and lit it on fire. And unfortunately, what he had there was really a rocket nozzle and not just a bucket. And my sister, unfortunately, happened to be looking in the bucket when this was going on, and it singed her hair and burned a hole in the ceiling of this room. Yeah, we didn't ask him to do anything complicated after that.
It's not unusual for recipes to be many decades old, but like Maker's Mark, many have been refined to fit the taste of a new generation. Who are the tastemakers? Every distillery has its own personal wizard, a combination gatekeeper and head chef, but they're officially called the master distillers. And when it comes down to it, they're the rock stars of the bourbon world. And don't they know it?
The master distiller is the luckiest person in the world.
He looks after the details of making good bourbon and aging good bourbon.
Choosing the grain recipe, getting the right yeast strain, getting the length of time for fermentation, how much sour and the sour mash to use.
It's a lot more complicated than people realize, so it really takes a long time to make the finished product. You have to be very busy, but you have to have a lot of patience. You're responsible for the quality, you're responsible for meeting specifications.
The master distiller gets to taste the whiskey.
The secret to it is working with someone who has preceded you.
For the most part, these recipes have been handed down since the 30s. So the main thing is to be consistent and to deliver quality.
And it's just not the product, in the bottle. It's the passion for the people you work with, it's the passion for the history of your product, the passion for the distillery. You're the ultimate cheerleader for your product and for the industry.
The longer you're at it, the better you get at it. And I've been at it now 57 years, so it takes a while.
So what makes a master distiller different from you or me? How about a photographic nose?
You do develop a photo memory for aromas and flavors. The ability to nose the aroma, to taste the intricacies, to feel on your palate the product is of utmost importance. You have to be trained, you have to have the innate God-given ability to do that as well, but you also train as an athlete. You do it over and over again every day.
At last, an exercise program I can get behind. What else?
I tend to remember virtually everything I've tasted.
Everything? That's quite a memory, considering that a master distiller will sample every barrel he makes.
The mark of a good bourbon, one that's pleasing to the palate, smooth, has a good flavor, good aroma, and does not have any bite or after taste effects to it.
These master distillers are the ultimate connoisseurs, ambassadors, and scientists in the bourbon world. But it's hard to find anyone in Kentucky who doesn't invite you to share in the legend, lore, and flavor of the local liquor. Coming up, we take them up on their offer and follow the Bourbon Trail to see the inner workings of the 6-time Distillery of the Year. And we'll show you what you should really be tasting when you take a sip of some of Kentucky's finest, when How the Best is Done returns. We've learned that all bourbon is whiskey. So what else is whiskey besides bourbon? Scotch, Irish, Canadian, rye, and Tennessee whiskey. You know what's not bourbon? Jack Daniel's. That's a Tennessee whiskey. Close but not bourbon. Tennessee whiskey is charcoal filtered, an added step not allowed by the rules of bourbon. Welcome back to How the Best is Done. We've chatted with bourbon experts, learned about bourbon's history, and seen how the barrels are made. Now it's time to really get down and dirty. Let's hit the trail. The bourbon distiller's reliance on the unique Kentucky geology, that magical combination of limestone water and iron-free soil, doesn't just make for great spirits, it also makes for great tourism in the form of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail.
Trails in Kentucky go back to when Daniel Boone came over the Cumberland Gap, and he followed a buffalo trail. And the Bourbon Trail goes from distillery to distillery. So today you meander through Kentucky, following the Bourbon Trail, just like 200 years ago you would have meandered through Kentucky following the buffalo trails.
The Kentucky Bourbon Trail takes advantage of the relative closeness of the industry's main players. With the big makers within an hour or so from each other, the Bourbon Trail is the best place to learn about bourbon.
We're all part of it, and we are proud of our part of it, and we like to share it with other people.
To take advantage of some of that Kentucky hospitality, we grabbed a couple of bourbon fans and longtime friends. Meet Sledge and Stu, a couple of ex-Marines who love their bourbon.
I've just had this interest in how is it made, where does it come from? I want to know if I have good taste or bad taste. I want to know if what I like in bourbon is what is good about bourbon.
I like the versatility of bourbon. It can be a very bracing drink if you're out splitting wood in the cold. It can be a great comfort at the end of a busy or stressful day. It's something that I share with special people in special occasions in my life. When I want everything to be the best and just the right thing, And so I want to know more about it so I know how to choose just the right thing. We need bigger glasses.
We're taking them with us behind the scenes to see how much they learn along the way. Don't worry, they're not driving. The best place to find out what goes into bourbon? A distillery, of course. But which one? Remember, once upon a time, the hills of Kentucky were dotted with thousands of stills. After Prohibition, legal distilleries took over the bourbon trade. Over time, they consolidated. And nowadays, the hundreds of brands of bourbon on the market are made by a handful of companies. And what bourbons they are! There's Jim Beam, the best-selling bourbon in the world. One of the oldest distilleries in the country was built by Elijah Pepper in 1812. Now it's the home of Woodford Reserve, the official bourbon of the Kentucky Derby. Maker's Mark Distillery in Loretto has been designated a National Historic Landmark. Their stills are made of gleaming copper. They only make one kind of bourbon. Of course, they make quite a bit of it, and every bottle is hand-dipped for its distinctive seal. We checked out a lot of places, but the place we chose to see how the best is done is in the town of Frankfort.
Welcome to Buffalo Trace Distillery.
Buffalo Trace is the oldest continuously operated bourbon distillery, period. It's won numerous awards for itself and its array of products.
We have 13 different bourbons, and we have 33 different expressions of the 13 different bourbons.
So their bourbon is good and they make a lot of it. 3.5 million gallons a year. We went inside to see how the process works.
You want to start with some good, clean, high-quality raw ingredients, namely, for us, we make corn, rye, and malted barley.
Step 1, the mash. You make the cornmeal mash.
The way you make mash is you grind up a grain into a meal, like cornmeal, and you drop it into water, and then once you mix that together and heat it, that becomes a mash.
Step 2, yeast. Believe it or not, the yeast is one of the secret ingredients.
We have a yeast strain that we isolated in the 30s, and we actually have used that ever since. And we actually use the same yeast strain for all of our bourbons, and we guard that pretty closely. That's a very key ingredient.
These 92,000-gallon fermentation tanks are the largest in the world. Inside, the yeast goes to work, turning the sugar into alcohol.
This is called fermentation. It takes from 3 to 5 days. There's nothing stirring the product, nothing stirring it, no air being blown in. That is actually the yeast working, consuming the sugars in the mash. They're doing all the activity that you see here.
The result of all that activity? Beer?
We call it beer because after it's fermented, it's about 7.5% alcohol. And once it becomes beer, then we send it to the still house and distill it. Distillation is a critical step in the production of the bourbon.
That's because distillation is how you get the alcohol out.
Behind me is the still, the bourbon still. It is a 40-foot tall, continuously operating still, meaning the mash enters the top, the mash dribbles down, the mash is met by live steam, which extracts the alcohol. They can run about 500 barrels in one 10-hour shift through that, and each barrel holds 53 gallons.
The leftover grains wind up as cattle feed. Don't worry, there's no cow tippling going on. At this point, all the alcohol's been separated out.
The first distillation is coming out here. It's about 120 proof. We call it White Dog. It is basically what in the eastern hills of Kentucky they call White Lightning.
White Lightning, also known as old-fashioned moonshine. The second distillation is even stronger, 130 proof.
We double distill all of our bourbon. It removes some of the impurities, it mellows it out a little bit, and it raises the proof just a tad.
From here, it moves to another building where it is cut to 125 proof and then put in the barrel to age. At this point, it's still corn whiskey. As soon as it hits the barrel, it's officially bourbon. But remember, it's the aging that turns the White Dog red and gives the bourbon its complex flavors. Each barrel holds about 53 gallons of bourbon. Once filled, they're sent over to the rick house, a warehouse where the aging begins. Like any warehouse, the inventory is cataloged and put in its proper place. Nothing is left to chance.
Makes a big difference where we put our product on the upper floors and lower floors.
Top floor is similar to an attic, so generally it's always really hot, drier, and so that creates a different style bourbon. It'll age a little faster, it'll be a little hotter. You want to put a younger bourbon at the top because it'll generally age a little faster.
So now we wait. For years, the barrels are exposed to the heat of Kentucky's summer and the cold of its winter. Quiet now. Do you hear breathing?
During the daytime, the temperature rises, pressure gets inside the barrel, and it pushes the whiskey deep into the wood. And by doing that, then overnight it cools and it sucks, it creates a vacuum and it's sucking air in and out. So that barrel is actually breathing over a period of years. If it lays there for 20 years, it's breathed for 20 years.
The barrel breath draws the alcohol in and out of the wood.
You are actually pulling your spices and stuff back out of the wood, and it creates a different taste.
At Buffalo Trace, bourbon is aged anywhere from 4 years up to 23 years for its most expensive brand. And this is one reason why premium bourbons cost so much. You're investing years in your final product. And every year you age a bourbon barrel, you must pay the angel's share.
When you fill a barrel, we put 53 gallons in the barrel, and it'll evaporate about 3% a year. And so that evaporation is what we call the angel share. You can smell it when you go into warehouses. But that also is a very important ingredient in the aging process because when it evaporates, some of it also condenses back into the barrel. So you get this breathing effect in the barrel, and that extracts flavors from the woods.
In bourbon, it's all about the flavors. Each barrel ages differently, giving it a slightly altered flavor from its neighbor, or from any other barrel in the warehouse. These subtle differences in barrel flavors are captured to create premium bourbons. Small batch bourbons are made from a limited number of the better barrels. Buffalo Trace was the first distillery to make them commercially available.
For us, a small batch is 40 barrels or less. So what we do is we go out in the warehouse and we select barrels from floors that we know produce very good, high quality bourbon, and then we'll taste each of those barrels. And we'll pick 40 or less of those barrels to go into a small batch bourbon. We feel good about that product because we know each barrel is good and we know it's a super high quality flavor at the end. So.
Even more exclusive, single barrel bourbons. Each bottling comes from a single barrel, such as Eagle Rare or Elmer T. Lee, one of only 3 bourbons named to honor a living distiller. Barrels are periodically tested to see how they are maturing. These 5 barrels of Eagle Rare are being tested to see which has the best taste. In a bourbon barrel, the cork is called a bung. The bung hole is what it plugs, and the tool to remove the bung, a bung jumper. The tool Obi is using to extract the sample is fittingly called a thief.
What he's doing is putting his thumb over the end of it and it catches the product inside.
Rodney and Leonard are comparing these 5 barrels of Eagle Rare. They were all made the same day and aged on the same floor of the warehouse.
One is going to be just a little bit better than the other. So between the two of us, we picked number 4 there. I would go with number 4.
We decided to throw Sledge into the mix to see what he's learned so far.
This one was much lighter, I think. These two were the smoothest aftertaste, but I think I like this one the best.
All right. That's number 4 is the one to rule them out, Pete.
So number 4 is the unanimous choice. It's ready for the next step.
Yeah.
I do think I need to taste these again.
Okay.
Once the barrels are ready, they're dumped. But unlike a Dear John letter on Valentine's Day, getting dumped here is a magical process. Magical because it gets us one step closer to the final product. We're going to keep following the premium single barrels here.
What I do is I'll dump the single barrels into a processing tank and I chill filter them.
Chill filtering removes extraneous fatty acids.
It has to be below 32 degrees to have the fatty acids swell to a point where they would get caught in the filters that we use.
And when I deem that they're clean, I'll pull them over to a finalling tank, bring them up to room temperature, and cut them to exactly the desired proof, whether it be 93, 90, 80, 107. And then from there, we'll put them up into a bottling tank. And every barrel I do, I take a set sample for the chemist in the lab to check, and then he'll give me the final okay that it's ready to bottle.
We would check it for strength. It has to meet the label strength that's on the container. It also has to meet turbidity or clarity of the product itself, standards that we have at Buffalo Trace, and it has to meet our taste comparison against our standards.
After it meets the scientific standard, every barrel goes through the most exacting test of all, the human palate.
If you could have a machine do it, I'm sure a lot of people would, but there is no such machine. It really is experience and the memory, the sensory memory, and he has that memory and that knowledge of what it should taste like and what it should smell like.
He is Elmer T. Lee, master distiller at Buffalo Trace since 1950, member of the Bourbon Hall of Fame. Now retired, he still comes in to taste the products of the premium barrels at this table, which has been used for this purpose since the 1930s.
They bring samples from individual barrels. They'll pour them into a sample glass here and reduce it in proof to 60 proof.
Bourbon is barreled at around 125 proof, but for testing, it's watered down to about half of that. The lower proof opens up the flavors. Too much alcohol content can numb the tongue and impair the important tasting process, and possibly your judgment.
Each item does have a standard established, and those that meet that standard are approved for bottling. Those that are not approved are simply turned sideways.
We rotate this table so that we can look at the samples and we're kind of lazy, sit in one spot. What I like to do is just go looking at each sample and compare it to the standard. And
this is the standard that I'm tasting. You smell it, get the aroma in your mind. Now, you remember what that tastes like. Now you're going to test each individual barrel to see if it meets that standard.
Yeah, you didn't think he was going to swallow all that, did you? Even at 60 proof, that is a powerful elixir.
It helps to swish the bourbon around in your mouth. Most of your taste buds are most active on the side of your tongue. It's mellow, it's mild, not too sweet, got a little spiciness to it, a little oakiness to it. Generally speaking, I can go through 12 or 15 samples and still feel confident that I'm giving each one of them a fair shake. And then I'll take a break and come back and do the rest of them.
Elmer is not the only taster. Every barrel must be unanimously approved by a panel of testers before it can be used.
Everybody's taste may be a little different. What I prefer might not be your preference, but we can guarantee that they're all good bourbons.
Who are we to argue with someone who has his face on a bottle? Speaking of which, this is the room where the super premium bourbons are bottled. Everything from the small batch bourbons to the single barrels.
Well, we do the Blantons, the Van Winkle, the Eagle Rare, Elmer T. Lee, the Buffalo Trace, of course. From dumping the barrel to putting it in the bottle, it all is one barrel at a time. Then you have small batch bourbons. Our Van Winkle are small batch. Those are typically done 4 or 5 barrels at a time and put in a processing tank, commingled and done, and then they're bottled.
How many bottles do you get out of a barrel? Turns out it depends on the age of the bourbon. Remember that Angel's share?
The older it gets, the less you get. I think the youngest we do in here is about 8 years old. And those usually are around 250 bottles to a barrel, something like that. The older it is, the less you get. Some barrels we get in, we may only have 5 gallons of whiskey in at barrel proof.
The handmade component of the process continues. These labels are all handwritten by retired distillery workers with nice penmanship.
Each label is numbered, barrel, rick number, the warehouse, and the proof is on each one.
The finishing touch? The corks. On a Blanton's bottle, there are 8 variations of the horse and the rider on top. Next stop, if you're lucky, a liquor store near you. Coming up, how should you drink your bourbon? We go back to Bourbon's Bistro in Louisville and put Stu to the test.
That's the youngest. That's my final answer.
Okay.
And we tell you which bourbon we think is the best of them all. When How the Best is Done continues. The current inventory of bourbon in all of Kentucky exceeds 4.5 million barrels. If you plan to visit the Bourbon Trail, you're gonna want to stop in Bardstown, Kentucky.
Bardstown is the bourbon capital of the world because the largest amount of bourbon produced in the world is produced around the city of Bardstown.
But Bardstown isn't just steeped in bourbon, it's also awash in history. What better place could there be for a whiskey museum? The Oscar Getz Museum started with one man's collection of antiques, documents, and memorabilia dating back to colonial times. Bardstown is also home to the annual Kentucky Bourbon Festival, which draws thousands of visitors. And the best place to stay? The historic Old Talbot Tavern, which boasts an extraordinary bourbon bar. But you'd better plan ahead. During the September Bourbon Festival, rooms at the tavern are booked up 2 years in advance. Welcome back to How the Best is Done. We've introduced you to the wide, wide world of bourbon. Now the question is, how do you introduce yourself? Turns out there are many ways. You can start from the beginning.
And that sugar is just now starting to be turned into alcohol, so it still had a sweet taste.
Sweet, I taste exactly that. Yeah.
You can drink it straight from the still. Of course, it might be a little strong. Or set the stage properly.
So I would recommend in a snifter glass in front of a fireplace.
Some people start with an unfair advantage.
So my first memory is sitting on Jim Beam's lap.
Others have to warm up to bourbon.
I probably was 11 or 12 when I first had a cap full of bourbon, bad blended whiskey my dad used to drink. I poured just enough of it into the cap of the bottle to taste it. It brought tears to my eyes.
You always remember your first time.
The first time I tried bourbon, I got lucky, I threw up, and I fell in love.
Okay then. But did you fall in love with the taste? We heard from the experts. Now, how does it taste to you?
I taste wood and I taste earth.
Just tastes like oaky goodness.
It sort of tastes brown, you know what I mean?
Almost like cotton candy kind of thing going on.
It's like a sweet brown.
It tastes old, which I like a book. I'm drinking a book.
Bourbon tastes like a long break from a horrible day.
Can there be a wrong way to drink bourbon? Like so many other things, the answer is no, and maybe.
As long as it's in a glass, I think it's in pretty good shape.
Show me the wrong way.
Nah, we'd rather show you the right way. So try this.
This is a Glencairn glass, and it funnels all the aromas up to your nose. And you can really smell the vanillas and the caramel in it. But this is the way to drink it neat, maybe with a cube of ice, but in this.
There you go. Is that simple?
Doesn't get much better than that.
No.
It's a sentiment echoed by our master distillers. If you want to add ice or water, go right ahead. Lowering the proof makes it easier to savor the bourbon's taste. And you're not going to argue with a master distiller about that, are you?
When I make a drink at home, a little ice, a little water, get it down to about 60 proof is where I prefer it. Some people prefer it at bottle proof. Other people like the real strong stuff.
Some bourbons come from heavy charred barrels. They're very robust whiskeys. The more water, the more ice you put with them, the woodier they become. Some bourbons are really crafted for highballs. They're perfect with ginger ale and Coca-Cola, while others aren't. So you really need to know your brand to judge what you'll put with it.
Seriously, you do. Need to know your brand, that is.
I mean, if you're going to mix, don't spend $20, a $20 shot to put in Coke. You know, just don't do that.
We've actually had customers that, I think they ordered the 20 or the 23 year, which is about $35 shot, and they wanted, it was a 23 year in Coke. So our bartender put the Coke on the side.
He wouldn't do it.
He wouldn't do it.
He said,
so,
if you're going to spoil the bourbon, you have to do it.
You'll have to do it yourself, but I'm not doing it.
It's time to put our student to the test and see how much Stu has learned along the way. His task? To rank 3 bourbons by age and cost, from the youngest and cheapest to the oldest and most expensive.
It's going to be age and kind of price point too. So we're going to go lower end, more pedestrian, to higher end, and with that, the age will go with that. So,
while Stu gets to work on his final exam, we get 2 other tasting menus from the owners of Bourbon's Bistro. First, a starter course, one for a bourbon beginner.
I'll start with an 80 proof Basil Hayden. Then I'd move them to probably a Maker's Mark, which is around 90 proof, is that right? And then after that, Woodford Reserve. So that's a good 3 to start out with. And then after that, I'd probably move them to the 12-year Pappy.
Yeah, very good.
And then the 5th one would be William LaRue Weller, which is 127 proof.
I'd probably throw in a Weller product, the Weller Centennial, which is one of my favorites. And then I would probably throw in Booker's, which is 126 proof, and that's going to give them a good kick.
Okay, that's a nice sampler. Here's a few others that consistently rate highly in contests and taste tests. Knob Creek, Eagle Rare, Evan Williams, Russell's Reserve, Elijah Craig, Booker's, Blanton's, Jefferson's Reserve.
Premium bourbon is the Van Winkle line. The 20 and 23 year, they're probably getting the top dollar for that. And retail.
$200 a bottle.
Yeah, so that's, as a millionaire, that's probably what you'd be drinking.
So come on, gun to your head, choose.
If I had to live with one bourbon?
Pappy 20. Pappy Van Winkle 20 year, that would be, you'd have to do that.
All right, I'll take the 15.
Made at the award-winning Buffalo Trace Distillery, the Pappy Van Winkle Family Reserve bourbons have won some significant honors themselves.
Yeah, we kind of hit pay dirt back in the early 90s when we got a very nice rating from the Beverage Tasting Institute in Chicago, which was the highest rating any whiskey ever got anywhere, Scotch or bourbon.
The Beverage Tasting Institute was founded to provide fair and impartial reviews of wine, beer, and spirits. They gave the Pappy Van Winkle 15-year-old Family Reserve a 98 out of a possible 100. Since then, they've racked up other honors, including double gold medals at the 2007 San Francisco World Spirits Competition. The Pappy Van Winkle Family Reserves are made with wheat as their secondary grain. They're aged for longer than any other bourbons on the market, 15, 20, or 23 years.
You taste a lot of the sweetness from the grains and also the sweetness from the wood, but once the whiskey is aged that long in the barrels, it picks up a lot of flavor from the barrel.
Hey, let's check in on Stu in that taste test.
This is more aromatic. I'm trying to clean out my tongue before I go to the next one. This is spicier. And yet this is not as aromatic as that one. And yet it's much darker. Now, from what I have learned these last few days, the older it gets, the more robust it gets, the more it absorbs from the barrel.
Correct.
So I would expect that the oldest to be the richest in color and texture.
Potentially.
And exactly. That's the youngest. That's my final answer.
Okay.
I'm gonna say this is the oldest
Okay.
because it seems to be the most, if this is the right way to speak of it, the most vibrant flavor. That it feels like the flavors
Like it's richer.
are richer. I want to say it's almost more active.
Final answer?
Yes.
Very good. 3 for 3. Very good. You had Maker's Mark, which is about a 4-year-old bourbon. They don't age statement, but it's aged about 4 years. And then the 4 Rose Single Barrel, which I understand you just had
Last night.
recently, which is very good. And you're picking up, I pick up a lot of cinnamon. So you talk about that spice. I
Yeah.
pick up a lot of cinnamon. There.
Yeah.
And then the Pappy Van Winkle 23 year.
I just had some Pappy 23.
You just had some Pappy 23.
I am privileged.
Absolutely.
I am privileged.
But that's
Thank
great.
you.
3 for 3.
He liked it. He really, really liked it.
You could feel the spiciness, the flavor in your mouth. But this one, not only feel it, but it started dancing in my mouth.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, obviously it's not a, I'm trying to find the literal
Yeah,
words,
exactly.
but that's what it felt
Yeah,
like.
yeah.
It just started running around and this is awesome stuff.
So if a bourbon can inspire poetry in an ex-Marine, it must be pretty good. And we agree. There are a lot of fine bourbons out there, and you can have a lot of fun figuring out which ones you like the best. Our pick for the best bourbon of them all is the Pappy Van Winkle Family Reserve, with 3 expressions, the 15, 20, and 23-year-old. There's one for just about any occasion. And now you know the best, and how the best is done. Happy bourbon trails to you. Wine, the drink of kings and gods, the subject of art and mythology. It's inspiring.
For me, it was something that I discovered when I was a kid, and I fell in love with it.
Wine is a subject of infinite possibility. It's of infinite interest.
It's a complex mix of 1,000 chemicals, yet at its essence is so simple.
Wine is about grapes. That's the main product.
There are good wines and bad. $5,000 bottles and $5 bottles. What makes one special and the other not?
What makes a great wine is one of the questions for the ages.
Is it the soil or the science, the grapes or the barrel?
Magic. Can we leave it at that?
Pharrell Williams here.
Hi, I'm Joy Bryant,
I'm Eric Ripper.
I'm Tom Colicchio.
I'm Dr. Frank Lipman, the host of On the Table,
the host of Across the Board,
host of Artist Talk,
Host of Hooked Up,
host of the show Be Well Week, Be Well Weekend on the Reserve channel. It's only on Reserve.
Did you know that you can follow my show on social media sites like Facebook?
Follow us on Twitter. If you're a fan of my show, hit the like button. All of the above. Share me with your friends.
Treat yourself. Check out a new episode of my show, Hooked Up.
And if you want to leave comments, feedbacks, ideas, whatever, love to hear from you. Leave a comment.
And if you don't want to miss the show, be sure to subscribe.
The one that's like down here, or is it here? Somewhere down here.
Thanks for watching the Reserve channel.
Only on YouTube. Throw caution to the wind and ask yourself what rules.